a struggle at times to come up with those unique eureka moments. Well, this whole talk was developed for a talk for a design conference I gave, and it originally started out on how to pursue creativity, and that's definitely part of it, but it has more to do with overcoming the fear associated with being creative and doing creative things. Now, knowing that I'm going to ask the audience to step outside your comfort zone and try new things and basically do something that you might not feel comfortable with, I felt when I originally gave the talk, I had to do something during the talk that did that for myself if I was asking the audience to do it. And that's when I told my daughter at the time to pick a costume for me to wear, and so she picked a rabbit costume. This is what I gave in the original talk. Very hot, almost passed out, wasn't fun. This whole talk is based on my own struggles with creativity. I'm faced with a deadline, but I feel like I'm running on empty. And so the key, if there's one takeaway from this talk, I want it to be the key to not only pursuing creativity, but enabling yourself to overcome fear in context of creativity is by pursuing creativity outside the context of work. And as you're going to see, it can apply back to work, but it's really important to pursue it in that respect. This isn't hard. This is all about taking a skill set you already have, it might be one you enjoy, and applying it in a different way. So I'm going to give you a lot of examples. Here's the first one. This is Mike Jones and his family. Mike's a designer based out of Georgia, and he loves to do branding. So he decided to brand a moment in his life, and that was his vasectomy. So this shows the branding he developed for this. I love this. This also points to another aspect of creativity, is creativity pursued, especially outside the context of work, doesn't need to be appropriate. And you have to be okay with that, because not everybody is going to understand creativity. They certainly don't understand what you do for a job most of the time. I saw this on NBC News one day. This made me feel really good. Useless majors. Here's another one. This comes from the BBC. Creative minds mimic schizophrenia. That's nice. Makes me feel good. So we know by the very definition of creativity, it's the use of imagination or original ideas. Essentially, it's how you think, how you process ideas, how you go about processing ideas. So creativity is all about formulating ideas in such a way that it's going to enable you to get to that area where ideas are developed. And we're really going to dive into that here pretty quick. You've all heard this saying by Einstein, it's okay. I think it's overused. The one I prefer better is play is the highest form of research. I think that's his best quote, because it's so closely associated with being creative and pursuing creativity. Kids have no problem doing this. You never have to train them to be creative. They just naturally kind of gravitate towards that. And it's only when they get older do they stop doing certain creative things. And once again, that usually has to do with fear. Here's another example. This is a college student based out of the San Francisco area, Hong Tran. He is a business student. He saw somebody take crayons and just kind of carve with them with an X-Acto knife, and that gave him an idea. So he started doing carvings like this with crayons and X-Acto knife, and that developed an art form for him that he really enjoyed. Here's some Adventure Time ones he did. Now, I'm a big fan of The Big Lebowski, so I asked him if he'd do a Big Lebowski one for me, and he did Walter. Now, the whole reason I'm showing you distinctly people who aren't necessarily creative is because creativity applies to anybody. It applies to any position, not just the creative industry, but even business people can apply creative methods and solve problems. That's what it all comes down to. Apparently, okay, that was a lion roar. It was supposed to shock you somewhat. Now, the whole reason I did this is, what does this have to do with the creative process? Well, there's a lot of common roars that are based off of fear. These are usually those head games we play with ourselves. You've done most of this yourself at one point. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. You're going to fail. Someone else could do this better than you. You should find a new job. You know what? You just suck. And even putting together a talk like this, I had thoughts like this. Nobody's going to like this talk. Now, the whole reason I bring this up is because fear is a natural part of the creative process, and it can work two different ways. It can disable your creativity and prevent you from coming up with ideas, or it can enable ideation. Here's another example. In World War II, this came under this was disclosed about 5 years ago in the Freedom of Information Act, and it happened during World War II, and it was called the Tactical Deception Unit, fondly referred to as the Ghost Army. And this was a tactical group made up of over 1,200 creative people. They took people from the arts, they took people from acting, directing, lighting, sound production, and they created inflatables like this, went to the theater of war in Europe and set up fake front lines, sent actors into local villages dressed up as generals to purposely leak information that would get back to the Germans about troop movements or whatever. Sound engineers would drive through the woods and play these speakers, and it would make it sound like there was troop movements or people marching. All of this was a ruse. All of this worked because of fear. They capitalized on the fear of the Germans to convince them of something that was absolutely untrue. So fear worked in the way where it debilitated the Germans, but the US Army capitalized it. One of the first ever psyops ever used in warfare in terms of the American Army in order to win, and they used fear to do that. So it's all about using fear either to equip yourself and also being aware of it so it doesn't debilitate yourself. Now, when it comes to forming thoughts, going back to thinking being the basis of creativity, there's a lot of different ways we go about impulses shooting our brain, and it doesn't matter what we're thinking about or what we're focusing on, that's how thoughts are formulated. And there's 5 types of brainwaves, and they're categorized into different categories. You have beta. All of you are in beta mode, unless I'm really boring, then you're one of the other ones coming up. Alpha, this is, let me go back. Alpha, this is the state just prior to waking up, and there we go. Alpha, the state prior to waking up or just prior to falling asleep. This is when you dream. Theta, there's a lot of good books written in the late 70s, early 80s about subconscious advertising. It has to do with theta level communication in subconscious advertising, for example. There's delta. Delta is when you're in deep sleep. But the one I want to focus on is gamma. Gamma is a higher mental activity. And when I first started putting this talk together, I didn't know any of this. It was only after I started researching it, and I always asked the question, why is it so hard to have that eureka moment? I've had them, but how do I make it more sustainable so I can reach it easier and quicker under a tight deadline especially? Well, it all comes down to equipping yourself to reach a gamma state, because that's where ideas are formed. When your brain is engaged and it's curious, it leads to creativity. It leads to those great ideas. When fear is introduced, it blocks it. You won't be able to get to that gamma level. So it's all about using fear as the fulcrum to reach that creative moment, to solve that creative problem. This is the key to doing this. This is how you exercise yourself in such a way to equip yourself to easily reach that gamma level of thinking. And it's about exploring creativity outside of work. And the reason why you want to do that, it's less fearful than work-oriented creativity. It allows you to be curious without having to qualify it. It lets you get used to failing with little or no embarrassment. And it's fun, and you only have to satisfy yourself. Now, creativity works best when it can flow freely. Water finds any avenue it needs to go to flow. And when you let creativity do the same thing, you're going to come up with those ideas, and it's going to allow you to get that to that level of thinking. And it all has to do with letting your curiosity drive it. If you're curious about something, don't overthink it. Don't analyze it. Don't try to figure out why. You don't need to figure out why. Just pursue it. Just move in that direction. And that's how you discover those curious moments that then bring about eureka moments. Here's another example. This is Mark Sparfel. He's an artist based out of Barcelona, Spain. And as he's walking down the streets of Barcelona, he would see that people were throwing away furniture. And for some reason, he thought, well, that seems like a waste of sorts, and he started collecting it, and he didn't know why he was collecting it. Half of his studio filled up with furniture before the idea hit him, and he started making sculptures out of it. So you might not always understand where it's going to go, but it's important for you to pursue it nonetheless. And it all comes down to exploding your potential through TNT. And that is try new things. And I click through that really fast. Anyway, you get it. Try new things. These are easy. These are super practical. This isn't anything that only creative people can do. So drive a new route to work. If you commute to work and you go the same way every day, especially if you're a creative person, give yourself a new visual diet. Give yourself an opportunity to see something you haven't seen before, because you never know what's going to trigger an idea. It could be as simple as that. Here's another one. This is an example. My friend Paul Howalt's a designer and illustrator based out of Phoenix. If you're familiar with Charles Anderson and that classic look of his with the ad cuts that date back to the early 90s, Paul was one of the fundamental artists with that team that developed that look. Now, Paul started, he's also a good photographer, so he started purposely driving out of his way, finding locations, and anytime he'd see something that looked like a face, he'd capture it. And so he has an Instagram account called I See Faces. So it could be pursuing creativity like that. Doesn't have to be client-driven work. It's all about just being creative for no other reason than being creative. Leave your work environment to do ideation. Years ago, I found for myself that I was able to kind of drop all the inhibitions that I had about just working through ideas if I just left the environment where I actually built those ideas or created those ideas. That might be true for you. Do some Lewis and Clarking. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so you can drop in any explorer you want for this, but I used Lewis and Clark, and here's an example. Freya Jobbins was a police officer in Australia, and she got injured on the job, and they were going to assign her to desk duty for the rest of her career. She didn't want to do that. When she was in college, she loved art, but she wasn't sure how to put that into practice as a career. A friend of hers invited her to go to a flea market, and she didn't want to go. And she initially told her friend no, and her friend said, come on, you need to go with me. And so she said yes. She decided to do something she really didn't want to do, but in the process of doing that, she found this box of doll parts. And once again, she didn't know why, but it intrigued her, so she bought it. And little did she know at the time, but it led to the style of fine art now that she's known for, where she does these portraits. And now she has gallery openings all around the world. So you never know where one thing's going to lead to another. You just have to pursue it. Observe the moment. This could be as easy as being in some mundane situation and taking the time to look at it in a way most people probably wouldn't look at it. And here's another example. This is Eric Barkley. He's based out of the UK. He's an illustrator. And he was just cleaning up his kitchen, getting ready to throw away some empty containers, such as this one, for a coffee drink. And he thought, it's kind of a waste that we just throw away all this stuff. So he didn't know why, but he saved it. And then he had the idea, well, what if I paint on it? What if I do an illustration on the container itself? And he turned it into this. And then that just opened up all these ideas for him. So he looked at all these other containers he was using and throwing away, and he started turning them into artwork. Set your favorites aside. So if you've been using the same set of fonts for over 5 years, then turn them all off and start using a different group for another 5 years, then do the same. The whole point I'm trying to make here is it's easy to get in a mindset where you think you need a certain thing to do creative work or to pursue creativity. You really don't. Here's an artist by the name of Jason Mercer. When he was a little kid, he's about 12 years old, he went to his grandmother and said, I'm out of art supplies. I need to go to the art store and buy some art supplies to create art. And his grandmother looked at him and said, you don't need art supplies to create art. Just use what's around you. And that made him look at things that aren't art-related supplies and products. This is a commission job that he's doing for Jack Link's Beef Jerky, the Sasquatch, but now he does object-oriented collages, and he does really cool portraits like this one of Conan O'Brien. These are pretty huge. None of this is drawn. It's all object-based. He's not painting anything. He's just collaging it in such a way that it paints a picture. Here's one of the Donald. Collaborate with your friend. Maybe it's hard for you to step outside your comfort zone, but maybe it's a little easier if you have a friend that does it with you. That's always a good one. Make drawing a creative habit. Ironically, in the creative industry, this is becoming more and more a depreciated skill. Now, when I went to art school, we had figure drawing. They just expected us as commercial artists to know how to draw. It wasn't that they expected us to be fine artists. They just knew there was a one-to-one correlation between coming up with ideas and drawing. Some of you might be thinking, I can't draw worth crap. That's okay. My dad can't draw worth crap. And to prove it, I asked him to draw crap, and this is what he did. And he even did a different perspective. Now, my mom's pretty creative. She's been an artist. She influenced me when I was growing up. My youngest sister is an illustrator as well. And my dad's been around all of them, including my daughters, who are very creative. And he just goes with the flow. So my one daughter one day during Christmas said, hey, Grandpa, can I draw on your head? Sure, go ahead. So they did that. So my dad kind of supports creativity in a lot of different ways. Now, this doesn't have to be hard. Here's an example of how I'll use drawing outside the context of work. So I like to use notepads to do thumbnail sketches on, to work through word associations, whatever. And then when the pad's empty, I have this piece of cardboard, and I'd usually just throw them away. Then I started feeling guilty, and I saved them in my flat file. And when I had enough, I decided, what am I going to do with these? Well, I started doing these little paper sculptures with them. So drawing is, in my opinion, design's best friend. If you start drawing, you're never going to get worse, you're only going to get better. Now, why am I harping on drawing so much? Well, every talk I've ever given, I always work drawing into it because that's how important I think. Now, there's four learning modalities that we can engage in order for our brain to start learning anything. And it's through visuals, auditory, reading, writing, or kinesthetic. You just have to engage two of them in order for your brain to start learning something new. So maybe it's an audiobook. You're liking it, you're enjoying it, bam, you're starting to learn. You could have an emotional reaction. So maybe it's a physical book you're reading and you enjoy it. You can still engage and start learning. Here's the best part about drawing. When you draw, you engage all four modalities at the same time. It's a supercharger for ideation and therefore problem solving. Now, somebody asked me, how is it auditory? It's the tactile feedback of the lead or pen on the paper, or if you're drawing on a tablet, the interaction between those two devices and the sound it makes. Now, here's the key with drawing. When you start, you probably won't be that great, and you'll probably want to give up, but that's what you shouldn't do. Stick with it. You only get better, and the better you get, you discover your own style, then you get the emotional factor as well, and it becomes a supercharger for your creative process. It's really important, this last one, have fun. Especially if you're going to be trying to make drawing sustainable. I hate drawing horses, so I'm not going to draw horses every day. Here's a good example of having fun and sustaining creativity for no other reason being creative. My friend Denise Gallagher is an illustrator based out of Louisiana, and whenever she makes pancakes, she has a squirt bottle and she does pancake illustrations, and she's always posting pictures on Facebook. I think that's a great example. So when it comes to creativity, we all live in the same world. We all see things that can annoy us, and we can choose to either let fear kind of block our ability to come up with ideas, or once again, you can use fear as a fulcrum. So this is a great story that came out of Germany. There was a designer there, and he knew this neo-Nazi party was going to have a convention of sorts. So he created this design to print on shirts to give away for free at this neo-Nazi convention. This also goes back to the point I made about you have to be willing for people to misunderstand your creativity at times in order to do it well. And a lot of his friends were saying, well, why are you doing this? Why are you giving away this shirt to a bunch of skinheads at their conference? And he just stuck with it. He didn't want to give it away. But what happens is he gave away 500 shirts. Those people went home, wore them, and then as soon as they washed them, this is what happened with the design. This message would come up. And I don't speak German, but in a nutshell, it's stating a message like, it's time for you to come out of that hateful lifestyle and make a positive change in your life. And through the process of one creative person making this decision to take something that was a distinctly negative point and turning it into a positive situation through creativity, and not worrying about how people were going to respond to it, 7 people came out of that lifestyle and changed their life. And I thought that was a great example of taking a negative situation and making it very positive. Now, it doesn't have to be that dense and serious. I do a lot of logo development. A lot of work I do in this realm is for larger agencies like Lander Associates, et cetera. And I love doing logo design and brand development. It's one of my favorite activities as a creative person, but I get irritated with all these things I see online where 99 designs, for example, you name it, and they lowball design, and it just gives our industry, it gives small business for the most part gets exploited by it, in my opinion, and it gives them a poor perception of what our industry can do for them. So when I first got my iPad, this goes back quite a few years now, I saw this. One site had just ripped off 33 of my designs, and I had to hire a copyright lawyer to go after them. I decided to create a brand parody site for cheap asses, and it's called 5 Minute Logo, and it has certain rules of engagement. You can make any suggestion for the design, but more than likely I'll do whatever I want because you're a cheap ass. You probably won't like it, nor will you want to use it. If you want to change the design, it'll cost you another $5, and you can't whine about it. And believe it or not, a lot of people have done this over the past 4 or 5 years, and here I'm just going to show you a few examples of them. So here's an owner that has a dog named Tyson, so I thought, well, he might taste like chicken, so I drew this. A motivational speaker had a talk called Make Small Talk Sexy. I did this for him. You know, I can't use that. I said, nope, you probably can't. Here's 2 guys that started a brewery. They're calling it Lazy Eye Brewery, so I did this for them. Some of them are cute. Here's somebody that has a little craft business called Narwhal Paper, kind of cute. This site's gone viral a couple times, so there is a website called Church Marketing Sucks that put it on their site. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people understood that it was a parody, because I got one that was, can you do a logo for our vacation Bible study? It's called This Little Light of Mine. Oh, sure, I can do that. So we did that, and they didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. There's another one that came in, it's called High Peak Baptist Church, and I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to see how they reacted to this when they opened it, but unfortunately I didn't. Now, if you want to see all the cheap-ass logos I've done, I post most of them on the Facebook account called 5 Minute Logo. You can check that out. But that's just my way of venting and pursuing creativity for no other reason than just to have fun. When I was drawing this talk to a close, I was trying to figure out what's the best way to sum things up. And I really like this quote, success is a journey, not a destination. So thinking about that quote, I was trying to come up with a visual I could use to end this talk with. And I wasn't sure how I wanted to wrap everything up. I knew what I wanted it to relay, I just wasn't sure how to visually do it. And in the process of just looking online and trying to figure out some kind of idea to pull together and to reinforce what I was trying to say, I kind of stumbled upon this that I'd never seen before, and this is the tombstone for Mel Blanc. And if you don't know who Mel Blanc is, he's the voice of the Looney Tunes, so he does all the Looney Tune characters. And as I was looking at this, a thought hit me, and that is, at some point in history, this graphic was determined to sum up a life. They have a date, they have a dash, and they have another date. And if you look at this, the dates don't matter. All that matters is the dash. You're all dashes. Your life is summed up as a dash. So I guess all I'm saying is, knowing that is, make your dash an interesting one. Don't let fear hold you back, because it will if you let it. When you're working on a project, let's say, or you're trying to come up with a unique idea and you just feel like you're hitting the wall and not going anywhere, that's when you want to stick with it. You're close to coming up with that idea. And most times you get to that point, you can set it aside in frustration, but you'll almost always come up with your idea very shortly after that when you're not even thinking it. It'll just hit you. But you have to get to that point of frustration, because fear is part of the creative process. And if fear isn't part of your creative process, I would argue you're not trying hard enough. So you have to really let that get to that level and recognize when you feel like giving up, that's the moment you shouldn't, you need to keep pushing, because you will come up with that eureka moment. You'll reach that gamma level of thinking, and you'll come up with that idea that's going to solve the problem you're working on. If you want full notes on the full talk, this is kind of a truncated version. You can use this link. And I forgot I had Harry Connick Jr. playing in the background here. That's it. Thank you very much.